everyone and welcome back to ESC Fan TV. My name is Nicklas and I will be your host for this video where we're going to be talking about Eurovision Choir 2019. Now before we get started with this video, I just want to say that if you are just stumbling across ESC Fan TV, well, hello, nice to have you here. It would mean a lot for us if you would click that subscribe button just down below. We have a lot of fantastic shows already produced and we plan to do many more in the upcoming Junior Eurovision season and of course next year for the Eurovision in the Netherlands. So definitely stick around if you are interested in Eurovision, and remember, if you like this video, please give it a little like. Now on to the video. Like I said, today we will be talking about Eurovision Choir. For those who aren't aware, this weekend we saw the second edition of Eurovision Choir, which is a special spin-off Eurovision event done by the EBU. Now this show is a lot different compared to the main Eurovision or Junior Eurovision for that matter. This show, there is no televoting, it is all the voting is done by 3 juries, and it's also very different in the sense that the choirs that are performing in the show do not bring original songs to the stage, they bring already made songs. They can bring medleys, they can bring pop songs, they can bring folk songs, you get the idea. Now this, along with other Eurovision events such as Eurovision Young Dancers and Young Musicians, they are events that aren't watched by a lot of people. I think that's a shame. Personally, I really enjoy Eurovision Choir. I watched the first edition from Latvia 2 years ago and I really fell in love with this show because somehow EBU is able to make something like choral singing, which is something that typically isn't that accessible for people that aren't really aware of what choral singing is all about. They're able to make this accessible to a more mainstream crowd, and I think this year even more compared to the first edition 2 years ago managed to bring a feeling of something that we can all get behind, that this isn't just some elitist choral singing, this is actually something that even people like me who have no understanding of choral singing can get behind. If you haven't watched any of this show before, I suggest you go onto YouTube and watch some of the previous performances, both the performances from 2017 and the performances from this year. Because there is definitely something lovely about Eurovision Choir that I hope everyone can get to experience. Now with that being said, let's talk about this year's contest. This year's contest was held in Gothenburg in Sweden, and we saw 10 countries taking the stage. Now something that's also really interesting to point out is the fact that this year Scotland debuted at the Eurovision Choir. And this is actually the first time that Scotland is taking part in a Eurovision event, so welcome Scotland to the Eurovision family. The show consisted of a semi-final where all the 10 countries performed, and then after that we saw a super final where the juries chose 3 of the choirs to go through to a super final where they then had to sing a different arrangement. And after that, the winner was crowned. Now I'm gonna go over what I thought about the 3 super finalists, and after that I will give some honorable mention to some of the countries that I really enjoyed. Now keep in mind this video will be my personal opinion. If you have some different opinions, that's totally okay, and we would love for you to join the conversation about what you thought about the Eurovision Choir. You can of course do that down in the comments below. So let's get on with it. I'm going to start with the country's 3rd place, which is Jasper from Slovenia. Now this choir was very different compared to a lot of the other arrangement we saw this evening. This choir was special because they only had 7 singers on stage, which begs the question, how many people do you need to become a choir? I guess in this contest 7 people is enough for a choir. For me, I thought it definitely stood out a lot because being only 7 singers, this more ended up sounding like a pop a cappella group rather than a choir. There weren't a lot of different voices, but I will give the group credit for the fact that all the members, all of them sang different tones. So at least they gave a whole picture and everything was very well put together. But I will say that it was a much different experience, and I'm not sure that I would really classify this as choral singing, but maybe that's just me. I just want to point out that I do not have any experience in choral singing. I was in a school choir when I was very young, but I don't think that counts for anything. However, I did like their performance. I thought it was very modern and they managed to really capture the audience with being very lively on stage, so definitely I deserve third place. Let us go on to the second place, which is the choir Maska from Latvia. Definitely also a very deserved second place. Here we saw a mixed choir, which a lot of the choirs we saw this evening were either men's choirs or girls' choirs. I think there's definitely something really interesting about mixed choirs because it gives you access to a full range of vocals and many different vocals. What Latvia did really interesting and what I think gave them this place in the super final and this second place was the fact that they were really good at bringing in different kinds of sounds. Not only were they really good vocally and they managed to do a bunch of different tones and a lot of different harmonies in the singing, but they also managed to do a lot of like sound effects to their music. They had sounds of raindrops, they had sounds of thunder and lightning. It was getting very exciting for Latvia. The thing with all these voices is that it fills the room, it gives you a whole experience, and it means that you start listening to all these different parts of the song and it becomes really elaborate. And I gotta give them credit. There's a lot of work with not only trying to sing pitch perfect, but also making all these different kinds of sounds, and it was just a very elaborate piece, and I think it definitely deserves the second place. However, we are not going to get around this part. There was, of course, a winner, and you can probably tell from the grin on my face that this was a very exciting winner in my opinion. If you are new to ESC Fan TV, you probably don't know this, but I live in Denmark, and the winner of this year's Eurovision Choir was Vocal Line from Denmark. Now, this choir definitely made us Danes proud. This was more of what I would call a pop choir. It was a choir that managed to encapsulate both the feeling of a choir while still also maintaining some of these what I would call a cappella elements. They had some beatboxing on stage, and in general they were just... It was very important for them to make this a rhythmic experience as well as a choral experience. And I think this is something that really draws me to choral singing. Is I really like pop choirs, and I will mention that as well in a second when I mention some of my honorable mentions. I like pop choirs more than traditional choirs because I like the idea that there is a feeling of melody in there. It isn't just a bunch of voices going up and down, but there is actually thought about how you can make this sound like a melody, how you can do a melody progression in the song through different kinds of sound effects and different kind of sounds you can do with your mouth. And I think Vocal Line, they nailed this 100% along with being pretty much pitch perfect. Yeah, I'm very proud of them. I think they did a fantastic job representing our country, and they did a fantastic job at representing what choral singing in Denmark is, which is, it's very typical to have these choirs that have like one or two main singers that stand in the front and provide the lead vocals. I think it works great. It gives you a whole experience. It makes you really also listen to the song and listen to the lyrics. We are so lucky that in the super final we got to hear a song in full Danish, which is not something we've heard in a Eurovision event since 1997, so that was a big win for me. Now I know some of you will probably say that this is a bit of a biased opinion considering the fact that I am from Denmark, and I understand that. However, I will say that Denmark was actually not my favorite. I was a little bit surprised that we ended up winning this contest, but I think the very professional juries that we had in this show really looked out for this like pitch perfect vocals, and I think that's where Vocal Line stood out because they weren't the most bubbly on stage. They didn't have a lot of choreography and they didn't really put a focus on that, which is what I think made it really interesting. I think to get like the average viewer to watch something like Eurovision Choir, you need to do something about the staging, and some countries really did that. Some countries had really interesting and elaborate performances. I don't necessarily think Vocal Line had that. That's probably what I would have wanted if, you know, I could have picked something different for this performance. But obviously they did something right vocally, and I think that's what secured them the victory. Now, before I wrap up this video, I just want to mention some of my honorable mentions, some of the performances and some of the choirs that I really enjoyed. First up, I'm gonna start with Belgium. Belgium was one of my early favorites in the contest this year. Like I mentioned before, I have a love for pop choirs, and I think that's where choral singing really works for me. Belgium was also very much a pop choir, and they did a lot of the same that Vocal Line did. If it was up to me, I would have actually picked Belgium over Denmark. I know, that's a big shocker, but I would have. I think it's just down to the fact that I like the song selection of Belgium more. They had a medley of a bunch of different like Belgian pop songs, and even though they had I think like 8 different songs, they managed to transition into the songs very well, which I think was very impressive. It's a really hard thing to do in medleys like that. So I really enjoyed their performance, but sadly it wasn't enough to get to the super final. Now I also want to give a big special mention to both Scotland and Wales. Now I am a big fan of these like old traditional languages, and I love the fact that Eurovision is a place where we can experience these different languages that are a bit forgotten. I think especially Scotland had a fantastic performance for their first Eurovision event, and the fact that this choir was put together especially for this contest. They hadn't really performed together before. I think they did an absolutely fantastic job, and I hope this paves the way for Scotland to take part in more Eurovision events in the future, because Scottish Gaelic is such a beautiful, beautiful language in my opinion. I would love to hear it on the main Eurovision stage one day. That would just be wonderful. But hearing it here in the Eurovision Choir was a very special experience, and they really took me in. They really made me feel something, which is impressive considering the fact that I didn't understand a word of what they were singing. But it was definitely very beautiful. And the same with Wales. Wales, they came second when the Eurovision Choir was first held. What they were able to do, and especially this like lead vocalist that they had on one part of their performance, where they had like this young girl singing a very beautiful solo. That was definitely a fantastic moment. Honestly, I thought it could have gone to the super final because it was such a beautiful and special moment. There's just something about these like young high voices that haven't, you know, done this their whole life. They don't have as much experience as some of the older people that were in this contest. I think it's so beautiful to see these girls that really knows how to do great harmonies together. So I think that was a very beautiful performance as well. Now, those were some of my favorites. That's what I think, but what do you think? If you were one of those like me who watched the contest, then please comment down below what you thought of the show, and please let us know what your favorites were. We would really love to hear them. Now, this was all for my little special video about Eurovision Choir. Personally, I really enjoy this contest, and I enjoyed this show just as much as I did 2 years ago, so I wanted to share my excitement with you and hopefully get some of you interested if you haven't seen any of Eurovision Choir. Like I said in the beginning, if you haven't seen any, I definitely suggest you go watch some of the videos on YouTube, because there are some really beautiful performances that I don't think you should miss. Speaking of something you shouldn't miss, if you want to see much more of what we do here on ESC Fan TV, I would suggest you hit that subscribe button down below and like this video if you enjoyed it. Also remember, if you want to listen to ESC Fan TV on the road, you can do that. All of our live shows that we've done in the past are currently available on all your favorite podcasting platforms, such as iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and many, many more. Now that was all I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Look forward to many more ESC Fan TV videos coming your way very soon when the Junior Eurovision season starts. That is all for today. Thank you for watching and have a good day.